saying that he was in the den of vipers. He knows what it means to be silenced and how bad it is on campus to stop the discourse in anything conservative. So welcome to Greene County.
Thank you.
You drove here from Fairfax?
I did, from McLean, Virginia.
McLean, okay.
It's great to be down.
Thank you, and we're handing over to you now.
Awesome. Well, thank you all so much for having me. Thanks to Ed for that kind introduction. I'm just going to make one request before I begin speaking today, because I think this is the first time I've delivered this presentation in a courthouse. So if y'all don't like what I have to say, just don't throw me into the big house or anything, okay? Bear with me. So the title of my presentation today is Campus Censorship, how we can fight back against political correctness and historical revisionism on college campuses today. And I think most of us are probably familiar with the term political correctness. Generally, it's kind of defined as a system of rules that are imposed on our freedom of speech or freedom of expression for the supposed purpose of protecting other people's sensibilities or feelings. And I say supposed purpose because political correctness is both kind of an ideology in itself and it's also a tactic that is used on college campuses today. So there are people who have a legitimate feeling that they should be shutting down any discourse that offends them, and for other people it's a tactic that they use to not actually engage in reasoned debate and argument. Instead of engaging in a debate, what they'll do is they'll find one word or phrase in a more coherent argument, pick on that, and use it as an excuse to not engage with the larger point that was presented in what is probably a much longer series of dialogue. So historical revisionism is kind of a subset of political correctness that has come out recently, where the targets and the things that are deemed to be offensive are the legacies of historical figures, and specifically these are often icons in American history that are deemed to be offensive, oftentimes because of their history with slavery or with segregation or with those kinds of things. And obviously we all condemn a history that has a lot of aspects that we don't want to celebrate. But at the same time, a lot of students have lost the ability to contextualize the contributions of our historical figures. So if there's one aspect of a historical figure's legacy that we wouldn't condone in the 21st century, they'll automatically write off everything else that historical figure did, which is obviously a big problem. And because we have a lot of historical figures that we care about honoring in this country, we've given a lot to it, it gets to the very heart of our cultural identity as Americans. If we can't honor great figures like George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, and so on and so forth. So that's kind of a quick overview of those two concepts, and what I want to do today is tell you how these are being employed on college campuses to silence debate and to really limit people's freedom of expression. And I want to tell you what we did at Princeton to counter this problem, and I want to end with some thoughts on what you can do in your communities, whether or not you have a child who's in college, or whether or not you yourself are affiliated with university, or if you're just a member of the public. What can you do to get involved and make sure that universities retain their fundamental purpose of being an open marketplace of ideas where everyone can express themselves freely? So first I want to begin, because raise your hand if you've been watching the news lately and you've seen some protests at UC Berkeley that made you a little concerned. So this is the UC Berkeley campus in 1964. UC Berkeley was the head of the free speech movement on American college campuses. And the students in 1964 at UC Berkeley were protesting for their right to speak freely. And now we'll fast forward about 50 years. What happened at university campuses was that a lot of those same students who were protesting for their right to express themselves and make themselves heard, when they weren't necessarily in positions of power on the university, those same students from the previous slide are now in positions of power. They're now the administrators, they're now the professors at university campuses, and they've realized that it doesn't necessarily make sense for them anymore to promote free speech because they're now in positions of power. In a lot of instances, they're promoting their own narrative, and they're wielding their influence in order to keep other people from being able to express themselves on university campuses. So as I was mentioned in the introduction, I went to Princeton University. There were a lot of instances at Princeton of censorship that I can get into specifically in the Q&A after this. I want to begin just by talking about the main incident that led us to form the Princeton Open Campus Coalition. So in November of 2015, a group called the Black Justice League on campus mobilized and occupied our university president's office for 36 hours. They held an occupation, and we're all familiar with what an occupation is. We've had Occupy Wall Street, we've had all these movements where they basically sat in the office for 36 hours, and they said, we will not leave until you sign a list of our demands. And what's interesting is that before they occupied the office, the university administration knew that a protest was going to happen, and so they tried to appease these protesters by the names of our residential colleges at Princeton. The people in charge of those colleges had been called masters of the residential college, which is a term that in education goes back to Cambridge and Oxford at 1000 AD. And, but this was triggering and a microaggression to some of the students because the term master they associated with racial slavery. And so even though it's been in education again for centuries, that's obviously not the context with which it was being used. So in what should be a scene out of 1984, the university banned the term master and said that students were now required to refer to the heads of residential colleges as heads instead of masters. Even with that concession, the students still went forward with their occupation, and they gave the president this list of demands. They demanded first that the University of Princeton rename the Woodrow Wilson School of Public and International Affairs, that they rename the Wilson Residential College, both of which are named after Woodrow Wilson, Virginian, who lived not too far from here. Obviously, politically, I don't think Wilson was the best president, but he gave a lot to Princeton. He was a transformative president of Princeton University because he was president of Princeton before he was president of the entire country. And they wanted to strip his entire legacy, which included really transforming Princeton into the renowned university it is today, hiring the first Roman Catholic and Jewish professors at Princeton, and really transforming that university. He expanded it greatly. He built the first graduate school at Princeton, so he really has a legacy there. They wanted to tear apart that entire legacy because obviously he has comments on race being from the early 20th century, the early 1900s, that we wouldn't condone today. The second demand that they had was that they wanted to institute cultural competency training for professors, which basically is training for professors in how they conduct themselves with students, and really it's kind of like a way of indoctrinating professors in terms of what things are okay to say in their classes, which actually there was a professor at Princeton who grew up in communist Romania, and he worked with us in our group, and he said that this reminded him a lot of the re-education camps in his native country because of how repressive it was for faculty at schools to feel like they have to fit into a paradigm of what these protesters want them to say. The next demand was they wanted to require students to take a class on the history of marginalized peoples, and obviously they would get to choose what counts as the history of marginalized peoples. They wanted a separate safe space for African Americans. The safe space concept comes up a lot in these kinds of campus protests, and they actually wanted separate housing for students who identified as African American. And the last two, clearly the hypocrisy was lost on them about those last two demands. The last two demands really do show exactly, it goes against the fundamental point of what a university is supposed to be. You go to university to expose yourself to ideas and opinions from a variety of different perspectives. You don't go to just be surrounded by people who are going to reaffirm exactly what you already think. And so we really felt like their demands went to the heart of limiting free speech on campus and really destroying what a university is all about. In addition, obviously, to the demands, the methods of the protesters were really problematic. When they were occupying the university president's office, they were screaming at him. They were saying that he was a racist. They were, obviously, the very process of occupying the office meant that they were really not letting there be an even discussion, because when you occupy an office for 36 hours, your voice has an undue afraid over the people who are obeying the university rules and not occupying offices to get their way, right? Well, here are some quotes that come from that occupation. One of the protesters said to President Eisgruber when they were asked to leave the office, "As far as I'm concerned, they're lucky we're not burning this blank down." And obviously there was a little colorful language there. Another one said, "Everyone here is racist." And in an op-ed published justifying their protest, the protesters said, "Freedom of speech, as we understand it from the United States Constitution, simply does not apply to students on the lush campuses of private universities," which obviously is just frankly not true. And they also said, "If your freedom of thought means that I, a black student, do not have the luxury of feeling safe on a campus that I have worked my entire life to get to, it should have no place in universities or any other beloved institution." So basically they were saying anything offensive to them because of their identity should not be tolerated at Princeton. And this is a place where we're supposed to be able to have an open exchange of ideas. This is a university campus where if you can't speak freely here and have debate freely here, where else? So another thing that was really troubling about the protest was the way that they targeted students who disagreed with them, specifically African American students. They were kind of target one for the protesters. And this happens a lot with political correctness, because the people who are the biggest threat to the narrative on a lot of campuses are the people who, even though they're of a particular identity, they disagree with the narrative that's been prescribed for that particular identity. In this case, it was the African American students who didn't agree with the protests. And these students were viciously attacked by the protesters at Princeton. In reference to one student at Princeton who was African American who disagreed with the protest, they told them that they weren't black. They asked African American students why they weren't supporting their own people instead of support it being white sympathizers, as they said. They also made the claim that the white students didn't care about African American students. The last quote says, "Because you are a black person, I care about you, and I promise these white people do not care about you." And actually, so you know I'm not just making these quotes up, that's the Facebook post from which these originate. And the young man, Josh Freeman, who replies to them in a great fashion saying, "That does not mean I'm obligated to agree with you all," he went on to be one of the co-founders of our group, the Princeton Open Campus Coalition. So our group, we really felt in this environment, really quick, before we started the Princeton Open Campus Coalition, we were passing around a petition to oppose the demands and the methods of the protesters, and it got 1,827 supporters. Just to put that in perspective, Princeton has only about 6,000 students. Wow. So that's a pretty big number. It got about 800 more than the petition for the other group. The problem was that students were so afraid of being labeled as racist or white sympathizers or anything else on campus that we got these signatures that were either anonymous or they didn't sign their full name. They would sign with initials. And we got a lot of people coming up to us privately and saying that they would have signed the petition, that they really wanted to get more involved, but that they literally were afraid to speak out against the protests. Wow. And we felt like on a university campus, the fact that students felt afraid to speak their mind was a huge problem. Right. So in this environment, we decided that there needed to be an organization that was entirely dedicated, not a political organization, not like college Republicans or libertarians or anything, an organization completely dedicated to promoting freedom of speech, freedom of thought, and promoting the right of people to hold whatever opinion they wanted to hold on campus, regardless of their identity. If you're an African American student, if you're a female student, if you're a gay student, it should not mean that you have to hold certain views that have been ordained for you by the faculty or by other students. So in this environment, we formed the Princeton Open Campus Coalition. And here are just an overview of some of the kind of common tactics of PC culture on college campuses. They're always the loudest on campus. They, even if we have a majority of students who do support freedom of speech, the PC protesters always are the ones who are the most activated, and they are very good at making themselves heard by the administration. And then they intimidate the administration and fellow students into not speaking out, enforce groupthink and identity politics. They pick words and phrases from a particular argument and encourage people to drop whatever they're saying based on claiming that because that one word or phrase was offensive to them, the whole argument should be dismissed. and they equate being verbally offended with being physically attacked. Now, this is an interesting one because I've heard the arguments that are made by a lot of these protesters. They'll tell you that there is, because of offensive comments they've heard, they'll refer to it as a genocide, or they'll refer to it as that they were actually being physically attacked by those comments. In a video of the protests, you could hear one of the students, because I wasn't actually at the protest, but one of my friends who was a reporter who was covering the protest, she videoed the whole thing. And one of the protesters told Eisgruber that the rhetoric on campus amounted to a genocide against her. And this is actually a common tact of equating verbal, words that are they think verbally offensive with actually physical harm, and they don't see any difference between the two. So in that environment, we decided to found the Princeton Open Campus Coalition. Our first action was to come together, assemble a diverse group of students who had talked to us, we knew were fed up at this point. This was really like the thing that pushed it over the edge. We were all kind of already fed up, and this just pushed us over the edge. So we came together and we drafted a letter to our university president.
Was that in 2015?
This is all in 2015 right now. It's in November of 2015. We drafted a letter to our university president, and the letter said, this is an excerpt from the letter where we said, this dialogue is necessary because many students have shared with us that they are afraid to state publicly their opinions on recent events for fear of being vilified, slandered, and subjected to hatred, either by fellow students or faculty. Many who questioned the protests were labeled racist, and black students who expressed disagreement with the protesters were called white sympathizers and were told they were not black. We, the Princeton Open Campus Coalition, refuse to let our peers be intimidated or bullied into silence on these or any important matters. So we sent this letter to the university president. We requested a meeting with him. We kind of had the following strategy in terms of fighting back not only against the protests, but also creating a better culture on climate for discourse and debate. So first, we wanted to draw a clear distinction between us and the protest group. In our letter, we told the university president, we said, we're not going to occupy your office. We're not, when you tell us to leave, we will leave. We're not going to stay there for 36 hours. We had some concerns of our own in terms of the dialogue on campus, but we called them concerns. We didn't call them demands. And the very name of our organization, the Open Campus Coalition, was chosen because their name, their unofficial motto, was Occupy Nassau. Nassau being the nickname for Princeton. And we chose Open Princeton because we wanted to show that we were being inclusive and open of a bunch of different perspectives, and they were being closed off, and they were occupying. So everything about our organization from the beginning, we wanted to draw that clear distinction. We also wanted to demonstrate to the administration that the protesters did not represent a majority of campus. We wanted to activate that silent majority on campus that we knew agreed with us, that had been talking with us in hushed tones. I had a very, very liberal Democrat call me on the phone, a few days after the protest, as basically agreeing with me, but then as soon as I asked him to become more involved, saying this needed to be a struggle where we had liberals and conservatives working together, he said, no way, I can't do it. But we wanted to activate those people, the people who were the silent majority on campus. We also wanted to provide examples from other universities to make our case. So one example is on the cultural competency training, we reached out to other universities that have implemented that same demand, and we got responses from them as to what has happened at their schools. So this is one example from a student at Wesleyan University who works at the university. And she said, Dear POCC, I'm a student at Wesleyan University where I speak only after glancing over both shoulders, in hushed tones and with as many qualifiers as I can think of. It gives me hope to see your letter to your university president that there are students who are coming out in opposition to campus intimidation. I feel like I'm living in a version of 1984. Truly, I came to Wesleyan a liberal and have grown increasingly wary and afraid of the direction that is considered the vanguard of liberalism. I work blank on campus, and I had to undergo social justice sensitivity training. We were told these would be honest, vulnerable conversations for us to dig deep and understand our biases. The truth was that each of us recited lines. This was not open dialogue, we all know the script. In a circle, one after another, students said what they knew was expected of them as if honest revelations. Social justice is presented as a science, like we figured out things should work and now we will impart those findings on you. Anyway, thank you, so on and so forth. True to form, we had to blur out her name and where she worked. because of how dangerous it can be on campuses for speaking out. And we'll take questions at the end. I just want to get through kind of the general background of things. So that was one of our strategies, is to get examples from other schools. We also had a strategy of putting pressure on the university through the outside. So we conducted media interviews. We had contacted alumni to make themselves known with the university. You can put a lot of pressure on a university from the outside in addition to the inside. And as an example of that, just a quick example of, these are some of the media appearances that we did. That's a photo of us in the middle of an interview there. We were on Fox News, we did the campus publication, Market Watch, Washington Post, National Review, New York Times, CBS. We were all over, basically making as many people aware of what was going on campuses as possible. We also testified before the House Ways and Means Committee in Congress. That's one of the co-founders of the coalition, and that's Professor Robert George from Princeton there on the right. And I just put this in because it's a little bit of a favorite of mine. We were endorsed by Chuck Norris. If you see at the he wrote a large article about free speech issues on college campuses, and he quoted me, and he mentioned our group. And then at the end he says, I commend Draim and Sophia Gallo, as well as others who fight with them to preserve the very rights America's founders fought to secure for us. They follow in a long lineage of true patriots and real educators. So that was, I felt like nothing could go wrong once we have Chuck Norris on our side. So, but our an additional point was we wanted to assemble as diverse a group of students as possible to make our case. We were not all conservatives. Obviously I am a conservative. A lot of us were conservatives because we've really seen this issue firsthand. Conservative politics are the ones that are discriminated against on campuses today. But we had concerned liberals that stood with us. We had independents. We had a great mix of people from all different backgrounds. Out of the 10 original founding members, 4 were racial minorities, either Hispanic or African American. I think 2 were LGBT students on campus, 4 were women. So it was a very diverse group of people who came together. And it's actually funny because in responding to one of our articles about the group, someone commented and said, oh, that's probably just a bunch of white male students who are trying to assert their privilege. And we all commented with, no, this is a cross-section of campus. This is what Princeton looks like, and Princeton is sticking up for free speech. And then finally, we didn't just want to oppose the protest, we also wanted to offer substantive ideas to make campus better. So, example of that would be, here's some suggestions we had in our letter to the university president to improve the culture on campus. We wanted to obviously encourage students to take classes with professors they didn't necessarily agree with. Even though we opposed the distribution requirement the reason we did that was because it was a way of the protesters enforcing their ideology on the students. But we encouraged students to take classes with professors to expand their mindset, and I've taken classes with liberal professors. The reason why we opposed the distribution requirement was that it had nothing in there that would have encouraged liberal students to open their minds up to conservative thought. And too many liberal students never think to take class with conservative faculty on campus. Now, there's not too many, unfortunately. That's why our second demand or request was to have more professors of a larger variety on campus. But when there were conservative faculty, we wanted our liberal students to take those classes and expand their horizons. And then finally, we also wanted to reform centers on campus that represent entire groups of students. So we have these centers on campus, a women's center, an LGBT center, and they bring speakers to campus that they promote as being representative of that entire group. But they're not representative of that entire group because, obviously there were female students in our organization who were pro-life, and the Women's Center has never brought a pro-life speaker. This isn't like an important part of my identity. I'm an American and a Christian before, but I am also an LGBT student, and the LGBT Center never represented me. They never brought a conservative speaker to campus. So we wanted to reform those centers. So we met with the heads of those centers, and we said, look, if you don't start expanding the horizons of the speakers that you bring, we're going to make sure that this is an issue that we bring to the faculty. Unfortunately, this is still an ongoing issue because these 2 events, which we had on campus, we asked the Women's Center and the LGBT Center to co-sponsor with us because Mary Catherine is a woman, of course, and Guy Benson is a famous LGBT conservative, or gay conservative, and both centers declined. because they didn't want to have to host an event with a speaker that didn't fit their particular view. So we've published a bunch of op-eds in our school newspaper. The students who are still involved with the group on campus, because I'm graduated, are still working to change that. But basically, it's important not just to be against something, but to be for something. So we weren't just against the protesters, we were for certain reforms. So the results of all this, I'm trying to wrap up so we can get to Q&A. The results of all this is that the school came back and basically did not enact, after a few months of deliberations, they didn't enact any of the protesters' demand except one, but that wasn't really the university's decision. There was a private individual who chose to remove a mural to Woodrow Wilson, but every other ones of the demands were dropped. And they did not adopt any of the demands by the protesters. The most public of them was the demand on Woodrow Wilson's name, and the school has said that they are not renaming the Woodrow Wilson School, that they are not renaming the Wilson Residential College. They also are not having cultural competency training for professors, and to my knowledge, they have not segregated students in housing, thank God. So those are the results of the demands. We now also have Princeton Open Campus Coalitions on various campuses nationwide. Duke, Brown was somewhat surprising, although I guess they're in the belly of the beast, so they really need one. And Dartmouth all have one. George Mason and some other Virginia schools, and UVA, I believe, are looking into starting their own chapters as well. Princeton, because of the work with the Princeton Open Campus Coalition, we were ranked the top Ivy for free speech, and out of 150 universities in the country, they named us third. And this was the Guide to Colleges published by Heterodox Academy, which is affiliated with FIRE, which is kind of the free speech organization for universities. And they specifically cited the Princeton Open Campus Coalition as the reason for giving us that high ranking and what we were able to accomplish in 2015. And we were also named the top 10 influencer in higher education by the National Association of Scholars. I want to move forward just now before the Q&A to mention some things in our backyard that are, So I don't think I just put the headlines up there and I knew that I would get a response. So this isn't just an issue on college campuses today, because today, what happens at today's universities is going to influence what happens in society tomorrow. And we really have to nip this in the bud now. At our colleges and universities, we have to make sure that students are able to contextualize history. We have to make sure that students are able to engage with other opinions and not write off arguments just because they think that on face value they're offensive. And this is really important because these types of issues will keep popping up as more people graduate from our universities with that mindset unless we do something about it now. And here's some things that you can do. So first, support free speech activists on your university campuses. You might think that because you're graduated from college or because you don't have a child in a university that you can't have an impact. You can. And you can have an impact because first, especially if you're talking about a public university, y'all are taxpayers. And those universities are your universities as taxpayers. So make yourself heard. If a public university is not giving their students the freedom of speech that you think that they should have, you need to be vigilant and you need to make a point of addressing that. Also, even universities, public or private, they all care about their public reputations. They all care about how they're perceived and what the prestige is of their schools. And you should use that to put pressure on them if you feel like they're not doing the job that a university needs to do. Second, support activists who go against liberal orthodoxy within particular demographic groups. It can be really hard to be an African American conservative, to be a gay conservative, to be a female conservative, and be supportive of those people and know that they're really taking a lot of the brunt of the abuse on campuses when people have rhetoric aimed against conservatives. Those are the first people who are often targeted. So make sure you're supporting those people. Also, we need to take, I know it can be hard, but we need to take the high road and we need to have a model of free speech. So the Princeton Open Campus Coalition, if a liberal had been shut down on campus for their speech, we would be right there standing up with them too, saying that they should have the right to express themselves. This is a conservative principle. This is an American principle, freedom of speech, and we should apply it as such. We shouldn't just view it as a conservative principle, we should view it as a principle that's important for us as Americans to defend. So let's make sure that we don't just defend free speech for ourselves, but we defend free speech for everybody. And stay informed. Stay involved, stay activated. And one thing that goes into stay informed is contact your legislators about this, because there are some things that legislators in Virginia can do. For example, in some places, there are codes that can be reformed to make sure that colleges are hiring professors fairly, they're treating students fairly, and if there are any legislative reforms that can be accomplished to make this easier, your legislators should hear about it. And we're actually working now on some of that as college students. We're meeting together to see how we can make sure that the laws in Virginia promote free speech on college campuses. So I will make sure that we keep everyone in the loop as to where your legislators stand and what other solutions we've come up with on that level to fix the problem. I actually prepared a few extra slides too, because there was someone who visited our campus earlier the previous year. I'm sure you'll recognize her. Kathleen Sebelius came to speak at Princeton a year previously, and look, I obviously do not agree with Kathleen Sebelius on almost anything, and we went to the speech, to Kathleen Sebelius' speech. She spoke on campus, but I was president of College Republicans, and I wanted to have some fun with it, okay? So we made these shirts before the speech, which it says healthcare.gov, and then there's like one of the spinning wheels that you get on your computer when it won't work. And then it says on the top of the back of the shirt, if you like your healthcare plan, you can keep it. And we wore those shirts to the speech. During the speech, we sat respectfully, we listened to what she had to say. She was actually accepting an award on campus from the Public Policy Department. So the Public Policy Department was giving her an award, which shows you the leniency of that department. And they had two other speakers that same week. One was an abortion doctor from Mississippi, and the other was Wendy Davis, the former gubernatorial candidate from Texas. And they had no Republican speakers that entire year up to that point, but they had 3 very liberal speakers in 1 week. So look, we went to the event, we wanted to hear what she had to say, and we wanted to ask some questions. So I asked the following question of Kathleen Sebelius. I said, this was my question to her, because it was in the middle of the rollout of Obamacare. I said, in 2010, echoing similar promises made by the president, you said the bottom line is that under the Affordable Care Act, if you like your doctor and plan, you can keep them. Nevertheless, since Obamacare began to be implemented in 2013, millions of Americans have had their insurance plans canceled, plans that they liked, and according to your own words, were supposed to be able to keep. My question is, why were you and the administration at large so untruthful about this consequence of the Affordable Care Act? There are only 2 explanations. Was it the result of incompetence, since part of your job requires you to understand the consequences of laws that you support, or were you intentionally deceiving voters ahead of a presidential election year? So that's what I asked her, which I thought was a perfectly valid question that she's probably gotten from reporters many times before. Well, one of my friends was on they have like a student advisory committee for my major. So he was on this committee that advises the major on things. And he said that the administrators were apoplectic that I asked that question. And they said that it was an embarrassment to the university. He was quoting what he said it was embarrassment to the university, and that they were considering screening students for future events to ensure that they didn't ask reasonable questions. And the crazy part is that the other questions asked at this event by the liberal students who were there were the most softball questions you could possibly imagine. One student asked the secretary, they said, what was your favorite part of being secretary? And another, my favorite, and this is actually word for word, I could not get this question out of my mind, because these are the types of questions that the university wanted you to ask, not the hard-hitting questions that actually encourage debate. Another student asked the question, how does it feel to be such an inspiration to young girls wanting to go into government? Okay. How does it feel? It's like, what hard-hitting questions is that, you know? So the fact that the university was upset at us for asking the tough questions of a speaker, and yet at the same time encourage students to ask these fluff questions that had no meaning whatsoever. And this is at a university like Princeton, where you should be, you expect students to have the wherewithal to stand up to speakers and really make a good case. So that happened the year before the whole business with, it was a while ago now, but she basically... She didn't say she wasn't incompetent. No, she did not answer she did not pick one of the 2, if that's your question. She said something along the lines of that she didn't believe that the healthcare plans of those people were worthy of being saved, or something like that. She said that she was doing them a favor. Was basically, that was the gist of her answer. to which I wanted to go back and say, I think those millions of Americans would disagree with you.
Right.
But yeah, if there aren't any, I just want to say it's been outstanding talking to you guys today. I really enjoyed. I enjoy always talking about this conversation. So actually, I apologize if I went over my allotted time. I could talk about this for days. I could keep you here until Friday if I needed to. But I really appreciate you guys coming down.